In certain corners of society, a deeply ingrained and archaic belief persists. A woman who cannot bear children within 3 years of marriage is deemed worthless. This notion, rooted in outdated traditions, clashes starkly with the progressive values of modern society. It's a regressive mindset, one that unfairly judges women based on their reproductive capacity. Tragically, there are still individuals who cling to the assumption that every woman can and should conceive and give birth. Those who cannot are often labeled as useless, a cruel judgment that strips them of their inherent worth. My name is Ashley, and I am a 25-year-old housewife. For as long as I can remember, I have been unable to conceive, a fact that has defined much of my life in the eyes of others. Since childhood, I have been frail and sickly, my body lacking the vigor that others take for granted. My physical weakness meant frequent absences from school, leaving me isolated from peers. I rarely played with friends, which fostered a deep shyness. My pale skin and thin frame gave me a fragile appearance, and my quiet demeanor only reinforced the perception of weakness. My large eyes, which could have been a striking feature, were overshadowed by my gaunt look, making me appear perpetually unwell. My wealthy parents viewed me as a defective product, a source of shame and disappointment. They openly despised me, wishing I would simply fade away to relieve them of the burden they believed I represented. All their affection and resources were lavished on my older sister, Emily, who was just 1 year my senior. Emily was the picture of health, with vibrant rosy cheeks, sparkling eyes, and a robust constitution. She was their pride and joy, the daughter they celebrated, while I was relegated to the shadows. My parents showered Emily with gifts, attention, and opportunities, buying her anything her heart desired. I, on the other hand, was often left behind during family vacations due to my frail health, cared for mechanically by hired housekeepers and nurses. I was never truly part of the family. No souvenirs or tokens of affection ever came my way. To them, I was an inconvenience, an outsider in my own home. Growing up under this cloud of rejection was a kind of personal hell. I had no friends to confide in, no one to share my loneliness. My parents, eager to be rid of me, arranged my marriage as soon as I reached adulthood. They offered a substantial sum of money to my husband, Kevin, as compensation for taking on the responsibility of a weak, infertile, and defective person like me. Kevin, grappling with financial troubles, accepted the arrangement, not out of love, but for the monetary lifeline my parents provided. Our marriage was a transaction from the start, devoid of affection or mutual respect. As a full-time housewife, I managed the household while Kevin's whereabouts were often a mystery. He frequently returned home late, reeking of alcohol and indifference. His words cut deeply, echoing the same sentiment as my parents. Be grateful that someone like you, who's useless, even got married. The refrain was painfully familiar. My supposed worthlessness stemmed from my inability to bear children. Even after several years of marriage, conception remained elusive, and Kevin's resentment only grew. Yet, amidst this bleak existence, a glimmer of hope emerged after my marriage. While Kevin treated me with cold disdain, his family offered unexpected kindness. My father-in-law, who had known me since I married his son at age 20, treated me with the warmth and care I had never received from my own parents. He saw me as a daughter, not a burden. My brother-in-law, Mike, and his wife, Maria, also extended their compassion. Maria, in particular, became my anchor. A vibrant and accomplished woman, she ran her own interior design office while balancing a career and motherhood. Her cheerful disposition and caring nature made her a beacon of light in my life. Maria noticed my isolation and loneliness, often visiting to check on me. At first, our interactions were simple, sipping tea and chatting about everyday things. But over time, she encouraged me to break free from the passive role I had been forced into. Ashley, you don't need to be like a doll, doing whatever people tell you, she said with conviction. When I confided in her about my lack of education due to frequent illnesses, she dismissed my self-doubt. If you can manage basic housework, you can do most things, she reassured me. Learning something new builds confidence, At her suggestion, I began studying for a color certification, a small but meaningful step toward reclaiming my sense of self. Unbeknownst to me, my father-in-law had been working behind the scenes with Mike and Maria to support me. He had expressed concern about my tendency to underestimate myself, hoping there was a way to boost my confidence. Maria's suggestion to introduce me to new areas of study was met with enthusiastic agreement. To my surprise, I found studying enjoyable, despite my parents' lifelong insistence that I was weak and slow-witted. Passing my certification exam was a revelation, a spark of pride in a life where I had been taught to expect failure. I began to dream of pursuing higher levels of study, eager to expand my horizons. When I shared this milestone with Kevin, his response was predictably dismissive. "Must be nice to waste time on useless studying," he sneered. For the first time, his words didn't wound me. They ignited anger. Years of suppressed frustration surged to the surface, and I unleashed the bitterness I had kept buried. Are those the words of an unemployed man who lives off his wife's family money? I retorted sharply. Kevin, stunned by my uncharacteristic defiance, grew furious. "Shut up. I'm different from a defective product like you. I'm going to make it big," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. I didn't back down. "They call people like you big mouths," I shot back, my voice steady with newfound resolve. Enraged, Kevin kicked the wall and stormed out, likely to drown his anger in alcohol and revelry. I understood my parents' haste to marry me off, to rid themselves of their troublesome daughter. But I couldn't help wishing they had chosen a better partner for me. Then again, if they had cared enough to make such a choice, they wouldn't have neglected their frail daughter in the first place. Marrying Kevin was a mistake, a union built on financial convenience rather than love. He squandered my family's money on his indulgences, yet ironically, it was his family, my father-in-law, Mike and Maria, who broadened my perspective and gave me the courage to see beyond my circumstances. In the days that followed, Kevin stayed away, likely spending time with my sister, Emily. She had recently divorced her husband and relinquished custody of her child, yet my parents continued to dote on her, turning a blind eye to her affair with Kevin. I wasn't naive, I knew their intentions. If Emily became pregnant, they would likely pressure Kevin to divorce me, prioritizing her desires over my well-being. I had always known that one day, my sister might steal my husband. But now, armed with newfound confidence, I was prepared to face that possibility. Some time later, we gathered at my father-in-law's house for a family visit. I had been a regular visitor, but Kevin hadn't set foot there in months. His pride and sense of inferiority, particularly compared to his successful brother Mike, kept him at a distance. Mike had graduated from a prestigious university and held a high-ranking position at a large company, while Kevin remained unemployed, coasting on my family's wealth. Neither my father-in-law nor Mike ever highlighted this disparity, but Kevin's insecurity festered. He took pride in having married into a wealthy family, yet my father-in-law's affection for me and his high regard for Maria only deepened Kevin's jealousy. During the visit, Kevin's bitterness surfaced in a petty display. "Maria is amazing," he said, his voice dripping with insincere flattery. "She's successful, has children, and is a capable woman. Ashley is just stupid and can't do anything." His words were meant to wound me while elevating Maria, but Maria was unimpressed. With calm authority, she responded, "Ashley is my sister too. I don't find it amusing when my sister is insulted." Mike nodded in agreement, his expression stern. "Kevin, think about yourself before comparing Maria and Ashley," he warned. Kevin clicked his tongue, dismissing their words with a petulant scowl. I felt a pang of embarrassment at his childish behavior, but also a quiet strength, knowing I was no longer alone in this battle. My journey had begun in the shadows of rejection and self-doubt, but through the kindness of my father-in-law, Mike, and Maria, I was starting to see my own worth. Their support, coupled with my small but meaningful achievements, gave me the courage to challenge the labels that had defined me for so long. I was not useless nor defective. I was Ashley, a woman learning to stand tall, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, It was painfully clear that Kevin harbored a deep sense of inferiority when compared to his accomplished brother, Mike. Yet, instead of confronting his shortcomings and striving for growth, he wallowed in childish resentment. My father-in-law, a man of fairness and integrity, observed Kevin with a heavy heart, his eyes clouded with disappointment. He had raised his sons with equal love and opportunity, yet their paths had diverged starkly. On more than one occasion, he had confided in me, his voice tinged with sorrow, about how differently his two boys had turned out despite his efforts to guide them both. On this particular day, however, my father-in-law's patience reached its limit. Clearing his throat with a resolute air, he fixed Kevin with a stern gaze and unleashed a rare rebuke. "Aren't you ashamed, Kevin? Living off Ashley's family money without lifting a finger to support yourself? Ashley is a devoted wife, a good woman. If you're her husband, act like one. Provide for yourself. Don't you understand something so simple?" His words, sharp and unyielding, cut through the tense silence of the room. Kevin's face flushed a deep crimson, his anger boiling over at being called out. "Dad, Ashley was useless and dumped on me," he spat, his voice dripping with defiance. "That's why I'm just returning the favor." Before my father-in-law could respond, Mike stepped in, his tone calm, but laced with steel. "Kevin, I hate to say this as your brother, but your mindset is utterly rotten." Mike's cutting words, delivered with the precision of a man who valued truth over sentiment, struck Kevin like a blow. Cursing under his breath, Kevin stormed out, his pride wounded and his temper unchecked. As I moved to follow him, hoping to diffuse the situation, my father-in-law gently held me back, his hand warm on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Ashley," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I had hoped marriage would make him more responsible, but it seems I was wrong." Beside him, Mike and Maria sighed in unison, their shoulders slumping under the weight of the family's dysfunction. I bowed my head, feeling a mix of shame and gratitude, and quietly excused myself. Maria, ever perceptive, stopped me before I could leave.
"Don't worry, Ashley.
"Everything is prepared," she said softly, her words carrying a promise of support. I nodded, grateful for her kindness, and left my father-in-law's home to return to the chaos that awaited me. When I arrived at the house I shared with Kevin, I was met with a scene of destruction. The room was in disarray, furniture overturned and belongings scattered, a testament to Kevin's uncontrollable rage. As I stood in disbelief, staring at the wreckage of his tantrum, a drunken Kevin loomed over me, his voice slurred but vicious. "I'm divorcing you, the infertile one. I'm going to marry your sister." He laughed, a cruel, boastful sound, bragging sturdy, declaring that my parents had already given their blessing to his affair with Emily. The betrayal stung, but it was not unexpected. I had known from the start that Kevin married me for the financial security my parents provided, fully aware of my inability to conceive. It was a convenient arrangement for him, a wife who required little effort and came with a substantial dowry. But Emily, ever the golden child, wanted Kevin now, and my parents, true to form, condoned their affair. Their desire for grandchildren likely fueled their support for Emily's ambitions, even if it meant discarding me. When Emily had divorced her previous husband, she had callously given up custody of her child, dismissing them as not cute and unworthy of her attachment. The thought of a child born to Emily and Kevin filled me with pity. Would a child raised by such self-absorbed parents ever know true happiness? Kevin, oblivious to my concerns, mocked me further. "Get out. We're divorcing, so leave," he sneered. "I'll pay you alimony. You good for nothing." His shamelessness was staggering. He didn't even realize that any alimony would come from my parents' wealth, not his own. With a calm resolve I hadn't known I possessed, I signed the divorce papers, gathered my essentials, and walked away from the house. Instead of returning to my parents' home, where I knew I would find no solace, I sought refuge with Mike and Maria. I had confided in them about my suspicions regarding Kevin and Emily's affair, and they had been preparing for this moment. Mike's face was grim as he said, "I wouldn't put it past Kevin. Maria, ever practical, had already begun making arrangements for my future. At their home, their young son peeked out shyly before retreating, his resemblance to Maria evident in his delicate features. The boy was timid, much like I had been as a child, and his quiet charm warmed my heart. Mike, Maria, and I sat down to discuss what lay ahead. Maria had secured a place for me to live in the company housing of her interior design firm, where I would also begin working. The prospect of employment filled me with anxiety. I had never worked before, my life defined by domestic duties and illness. But Maria's warm smile dispelled my fears.
Don't worry, Ashley.
You can do this, she assured me, her confidence infectious. Mike took charge of the paperwork, ensuring everything was in order, while Maria guided me toward this new chapter of my life. After the divorce, I severed all ties with my family. Mike informed my former father-in-law of the situation, adding, "Dad, we're cutting ties with Kevin too." My father-in-law, though heartbroken, was not surprised. "Come visit as usual, Ashley," he said warmly. "Kevin is no longer part of this family." His words filled me with a sense of belonging I had never known. The divorce was finalized, and with it came alimony from Kevin and a severance payment from my parents. I returned the severance money untouched, determined never to rely on their wealth again. My new life began at Maria's interior design firm, where I started learning the ropes under the guidance of Stephen, a cheerful young man around my age. Despite his busy schedule, he took the time to teach me with patience and engaged me in light-hearted conversation. One morning, I arrived early and tidied the office, surprising Stephen with my initiative. "The office is spotless," he exclaimed, joining me in the cleaning with a grin. When I apologized out of habit, he tilted his head, puzzled. "I've noticed this before, but why do you apologize when you haven't done anything wrong? We're equals here. We work together." His words struck me deeply. For the first time, someone had called me an equal, challenging the lifelong belief that my frail body and infertility made me a burden. Stephen, a capable and talented man, could have held a higher position, yet he brushed off such notions with a laugh. "If we're working together, we're the same," he said simply. My self-deprecation felt foolish in the face of his generosity, and I realized there were kind, genuine men in the world, men unlike Kevin. Maria arrived early that day, catching sight of Stephen and me together. A knowing smile spread across her face. "Oh, Stephen, have you finally gotten close to Ashley?" she teased. Stephen's face turned bright red, and I was momentarily confused until Maria leaned in and whispered, "He's been wanting to talk to you alone for a while, but was waiting for the right moment." Stephen, flustered, stammered, "Director, we agreed you wouldn't say that," before retreating to the break room. Maria playfully nudged my shoulder as I stood there, stunned. When the realization hit me, a blush crept up my cheeks. "Stephen's a good guy," Maria said with a grin. "He's been smitten with you since you first walked into the office." In that moment, a spark of hope flickered within me. Surrounded by people who saw my worth, I was beginning to see it too. My journey toward independence was just beginning, but for the first time, I felt ready to embrace it. The weight of my past lingered, a quiet ache in my heart. "But I'm divorced, and I have a flaw," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper, my head bowed in familiar self-doubt. Maria exchanged a knowing glance with Stephen, who had just handed her a steaming café latte, its rich aroma filling the air. She reached out, gently patting my head, her touch warm and reassuring. Then, with a soft smile, she shared a revelation that turned my world upside down. The son she and Mike were raising, the shy boy I had grown so fond of, was not their biological child. He was the child of Maria's relative, orphaned after a tragic accident claimed his parents. Maria and Mike had welcomed him into their home, raising him as their own with unwavering love and devotion. My former father-in-law had known about the adoption, but Kevin, ever self-absorbed, had been kept in the dark. That's why I, too, had been unaware until this moment. Maria's voice, warm and steady as she sipped her latte, carried a profound truth. "When our son first called us Dad and Mom, I wept," she said, her eyes softening with a memory. Having a biological child doesn't make you a good parent. Blood ties don't guarantee love or loyalty. Just look at you and your parents, Ashley. But our son chose us, and we chose him. That bond, built on love and choice, is far more precious than one forced by biology. Her words sink deep into my soul, stirring a quiet revolution within me. I took a sip of the café latte Stephen had prepared for me, its sweet warmth soothing my frayed nerves. For the first time, I began to see that family was not defined by blood or obligation, but by the connections we nurture and choose. 3 years passed, and my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. I married Stephen, the kind and cheerful man who had taught me to see myself as his equal. Our courtship began a year after I started working at Maria's firm, blossoming from shared moments of laughter and quiet support. When I apologized, as I often did, for my inability to have children, Stephen's reaction was unlike anything I had experienced. His face clouded with frustration, not at me but at my self-deprecation. "You don't need to apologize, Ashley," he said firmly. "Would you be happy if I knelt down and apologized for not being able to have children?" I shook my head, and his bright laughter filled the room. "It's just a minor issue. Don't bow your head for something that's not your fault." His words, so simple yet so profound, lifted a burden I had carried for years, freeing me to embrace my worth. Even after remarrying, I remained close with Maria, Mike, and my former father-in-law, who celebrated my newfound happiness with genuine joy. On this particular day, we were on a short trip to a tourist spot Maria had once described with enthusiasm, a place she had visited with her family. I sat at a quaint tea shop, the air filled with the scent of freshly brewed chamomile, waiting for Stephen, who had stepped away to use the restroom. Suddenly, a voice cut through the calm, sharp and unwelcome. "Ashley." I turned to see Kevin, my ex-husband, standing there, with Emily at his side. My sister, still striking, wore heavy makeup that couldn't mask the hardness in her eyes. "You're still so gloomy, traveling alone after the divorce," Emily taunted, unaware of my remarriage because I had cut all ties with my parents. I ignored her, focusing on the warmth of my tea, but Stephen's return shifted the atmosphere. "Sorry, Ashley, the restroom was crowded," he said, his voice cheerful until he noticed Kevin and Emily. His brow furrowed, clearly wondering who these strangers were. As I urged Stephen to leave, hoping to avoid a confrontation, Emily's voice dripped with malice. "You found another man already? Even though you're incompetent and can't have kids." Kevin smirked, ready to join her mockery, but Stephen's expression darkened. "I am Ashley's husband," he said, his tone cold and unwavering. "Her name is now Ashley Stevens. And, by the way, we do have a child." He placed a protective hand on my belly, and Kevin's face drained of color. Emily scoffed, her cruelty unfettered. "I bet the baby will be disabled." Stephen's patience snapped. "Ashley is pregnant with our second child," he said, his voice like ice. "Our daughter is 2 years old, healthy and happy. She's with my parents today." Kevin's shock mirrored my own when I first learned I was pregnant. I had wept in disbelief at the maternity clinic, insisting to the doctor that I couldn't conceive. My parents had drilled that lie into me since childhood, and I had accepted it without question. But after a thorough examination, the doctor confirmed that my body was perfectly capable of bearing children. The truth unraveled further when I confided in Maria. She sighed, shaking her head, and offered a painful hypothesis. "Ashley, there's a possibility your parents deceived you all along," she said hesitantly. "They knew you could get pregnant, but they didn't want you to. They likely thought a frail child like you would produce a disabled child, and they saw that as a hassle. Worse still, she suspected Kevin had been complicit, using contraception to ensure I never conceived during our marriage. The betrayal cut deep. My parents and Kevin had manipulated me, reinforcing my sense of worthlessness to serve their own agendas. With Stephen, I had not only remarried but welcomed a healthy daughter, and now I was pregnant with a son, both mother and child thriving. The guilt I had carried, instilled by my parents' cruel scheme, began to dissolve. As Stephen and I prepared to leave, Emily's voice rang out again, her words venomous. "I aborted Kevin's child," she sneered. "It was a failure, probably defective." Kevin, desperate and pale, turned to me. "Please, Ashley, give me one of your children. Otherwise, Emily will kick me out." I felt a surge of anger, ready to unleash years of pent-up pain, but Stephen intervened, his gaze filled with disgust. "Save your nonsense for when you're in a coffin, you piece of trash," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut through their audacity. He took my hand, urging me to walk away, and I did, casting a final contemptuous glance at Kevin and Emily. The thought of their unborn child, discarded so callously, filled me with sorrow for the life they might have brought into their selfish world. Months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Caring for our 2-year-old daughter and newborn son was challenging, but Stephen was my partner in every sense, sharing the joys and burdens of parenthood. Meanwhile, Kevin's life unraveled. Emily abandoned him, and my parents, no longer useful to her, were cast aside. According to my former father-in-law and Mike, Kevin was drowning in debt, his pleas for help met with rejection. My parents and Emily faced their own downfall. Emily's affairs with married men led to lawsuits and alimony payments, draining her fortune and reputation. My parents, unable to curb her recklessness, lost their wealth, and Emily's dealings with a shady loan company left them homeless, pursued by creditors. They were no longer my concern, mere strangers bound to me only by blood. My true family was here, in the warmth of our home. As I changed my son's diaper, Stephen played with our daughter, her giggles filling the air. His laughter, bright and infectious, drew my gaze, and I smiled, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life we had built. He caught my expression and tilted his head. "What's wrong, Ashley?" "I'm just so happy to be married to you, Stephen," I said softly. He grinned, playfully patting our daughter's head. "Well, you're Mrs. Stevens too," he teased, his cheerful laughter sparking smiles from our children and me. In that moment, surrounded by love, I knew I had found my place, a family defined not by blood, but by choice, care, and unwavering support. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribe for more.